White woman takes black CEO's seat, then discovers he owns the entire airline. She thought it was just a seat. One comfortable leather chair at the front of the plane. To her it was nothing more than what she deserved. First class, front row, priority boarding. But to him, it was more than a seat. It was respect. It was recognition. It was proof of everything he had worked for in silence while the world doubted him. When the flight attendant glanced up and saw him standing there, ticket in hand, she hesitated. And in that pause, in that single, silent moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The woman in the seat crossed her arms, eyes sharp with entitlement, and smirked as if to say, "You don't belong here." Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice, others whispering under their breath. Phones tilted upward, already recording, already ready to capture a story they could sense was about to unfold. And yet, not a single person spoke up. Not yet. He could have argued. He could have demanded. He could have reminded them that he had paid, that his name was clearly printed on the boarding pass. But instead, he stayed still, eyes steady, posture calm, silence louder than any protest. Because this wasn't just about a stolen seat. This was about something deeper. A truth that would reveal itself in ways no one on that plane could have imagined. For the woman who sat there, lips curled in arrogance, thought she had won. She thought her wealth, her skin, her status would protect her. But within minutes, she would learn the truth. Not only did he belong there, he belonged everywhere. Because the very plane she sat in, the one she claimed as hers, was in fact his. And when that truth came crashing down like a storm in the quiet sky, every passenger would remember this flight forever. The question is, when the tables finally turned, who really ended up losing the seat? And who gained the power? It had started like any other morning for Marcus Ellison. To most of the world, he was just another sharply dressed man in a tailored beige suit, walking briskly through the private terminal with his leather briefcase and calm stride. But behind that quiet composure was a story few could imagine. A boy who once stood at the bus stop in tattered shoes, watching planes slice through the clouds, wondering if life would ever lift him that high. Now, years later, the airport wasn't a place of longing. It was his arena, his sanctuary. And though no one around him knew it, Marcus wasn't just flying today. He was checking in on one of his own investments. The airline whose logo stretched across the boarding gate wasn't just another carrier. It was part of his empire, one of the many ventures he had built brick by brick, deal by deal, after decades of relentless determination. Still, Marcus never flaunted power. He believed respect was earned not by shouting it, but by letting the truth reveal itself when the moment called. And on this day, that truth was about to be tested. The flight itself was routine. A mid-afternoon trip on a sleek modern jet, destined for a board meeting where billion-dollar decisions waited. Passengers filed in, executives, families, vacationers, all carrying the invisible weight of their own stories. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished leather seats, chilled champagne glasses, and the hush of privilege. And then she appeared. The woman who would set everything in motion. She was dressed to impress. Crisp designer blouse, diamond earrings catching the cabin lights, and the kind of confidence born not of humility, but of entitlement. Her stride toward the front row was sharp, deliberate, as though the space itself bent to her presence. And when she lowered herself into seat 1A, she did so with the air of someone claiming a throne, but it wasn't her seat. When Marcus arrived moments later, boarding pass in hand, he paused before her. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. Instead, he stood tall, politely yet firmly indicating the seat was his. The attendant leaned in, uncertain, eyes darting between the ticket and the woman. The woman barely glanced up, her lips curling into a dismissive smile as though the very idea of moving for him was absurd. The silence in the cabin thickened. Passengers noticed. Some averted their eyes, not wanting to be involved. Others leaned closer, waiting for the confrontation to unfold. A phone camera clicked on quietly in the corner, its red light blinking, recording the moment. For Marcus, it wasn't about the seat. He could have chosen another. He could have walked away. But in her defiance, in the way she leaned back as though daring him to challenge her, Marcus saw something bigger. The shadow of every moment in his life when he had been told he didn't belong. He remembered the teacher who once laughed at his dream of becoming a pilot, the banker who dismissed his business plan before even reading it, the investors who told him no one would trust a black man with millions, let alone billions. Every memory flickered in his mind in that instant, each one colliding with the woman's smirk like sparks meeting fuel. The flight attendant cleared her throat, hesitating again. She knew the rules. She knew what the boarding pass said. And yet, she froze. Perhaps it was fear of confrontation. Perhaps it was bias. But in that moment, Marcus could feel the weight of the room tilting against him. Passengers shifted. Some whispered. The tension stretched tight, ready to snap. And then, the decision was made. The woman would not move. She folded her arms, chin raised, declaring with her posture what her words never needed to say. I am above you. This seat is mine, because I say so. Marcus inhaled deeply, holding back 1,000 words he could have spoken. Instead, he did what he always did best. He stayed calm. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And while no one else in that cabin knew it yet, the truth was about to surface. This wasn't just a stolen seat. It was a stolen moment. One that would reveal exactly who held the real power, not just in that cabin, but in the skies above. The cabin air grew heavier with each second of silence. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty but charged, like the space between lightning and thunder. Passengers fidgeted, eyes darting between the woman planted stubbornly in seat 1A and Marcus, who remained standing tall in the aisle. The flight attendant, clearly uncomfortable, shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She held Marcus's boarding pass in her hand, undeniable proof that the seat belonged to him. But her hesitation spoke louder than any announcement. Her gaze flickered toward the woman, then back to Marcus as though waiting for one of them to back down. The woman didn't flinch. She leaned deeper into the plush leather, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness, her diamond bracelet glinting under the cabin lights. She looked up at Marcus with a faint smirk that seemed to say, "Try me." Whispers began rippling across the first-class cabin. "Isn't that his seat?" one passenger muttered under his breath. "She won't even move?" another whispered, phone raised discreetly to capture the scene. Someone gasped softly when the woman adjusted her scarf with a haughty flick, as though she had won a silent battle already. Marcus kept his voice low, steady. He didn't need to shout. His presence alone was enough to command the aisle. But no matter how calm his tone, the woman's response was sharper than a blade. She waved a dismissive hand, cutting through the air, and said loud enough for others to hear, "I'm not moving, find another seat." The words echoed. They weren't just a refusal. They were a declaration. A declaration that entitlement trumped fairness, that appearance dictated ownership. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained composed. To anyone else, it might have seemed like restraint. But inside, every memory of being underestimated, every insult disguised as advice, every door slammed in his face because of the color of his skin, all of it rose in his chest like a storm. The flight attendant finally found her voice, though it cracked under pressure. "Ma'am, his ticket clearly says—" But the woman cut her off sharply. "Do you know who I am?" Her voice sliced through the cabin, startling even those who had tried to stay out of it. The air vibrated with the arrogance of her question. She didn't just want the seat. She wanted recognition. Authority. She wanted the entire room to know that in her mind, she was untouchable. Gasps rippled again. A few passengers exchanged knowing looks, the kind of looks that said they had seen this play out in different forms before. Marcus still didn't raise his voice. He simply shifted his stance, placing one hand on the handle of his briefcase and the other on the seat back beside him. His silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Because sometimes letting someone expose themselves is the most powerful response of all. The woman, emboldened by what she thought was victory, leaned forward now. Her face, twisted with indignation, came closer to Marcus's. "You don't belong here. People like you don't sit in seats like this." The words landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling through every passenger in earshot. A few gasps turned into stunned silence. A man in the second row shook his head, pulling out his phone fully now, no longer trying to hide the recording. A mother clutched her child closer, whispering something in the boy's ear. The flight attendant froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. It wasn't just fear of confrontation anymore. It was fear of being caught in the storm. Marcus inhaled, slowly, deliberately. Every instinct screamed to fire back, to reclaim the dignity that the woman had tried to strip from him with one venomous sentence. But he didn't. Instead, he locked his eyes on hers, steady, unblinking, unshaken. And in that gaze was something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not defeat, but power. Quiet, undeniable power. The tension grew unbearable. Even those who had tried to ignore the scene now leaned forward, as though the cabin itself had shifted into an invisible courtroom. Passengers were no longer just observers. They were witnesses. And then, just as the moment reached its breaking point, another figure entered the aisle. A uniformed security guard, broad-shouldered and alert, drawn by the rising commotion. His eyes scanned the scene, lingering on Marcus, then on the woman still seated defiantly in 1A. The woman didn't falter. She threw her chin high, pointing toward Marcus. "He's the problem, remove him." Her words cut the cabin in half. Some passengers shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered under their breath, voices low but furious. Phones were now openly recording from multiple angles. The story was spreading in real time, before the plane even left the ground. The guard hesitated, clearly torn. Protocol said one thing, bias whispered another. But the truth sat heavy in the air, undeniable yet unseen. Marcus stood his ground. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to plead. Because what no one else realized, what not even the flight attendant or the guard understood, was that this wasn't just a fight for a seat. This was a collision between arrogance and truth. And very soon, the truth would rise higher than any plane in the sky. The security guard's presence magnified the tension tenfold. Passengers who had tried to avoid eye contact were now riveted, their eyes darting between Marcus, the furious woman in 1A, and the flight attendant frozen in the aisle. The woman seized her chance. She leaned back in the seat like a queen on her throne, gesturing sharply at Marcus. "I told you," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "He doesn't belong here. People like him should know their place. Do your job and get him off this plane." Her words rang through the cabin, louder than the jet engines ever could. They sliced the silence into shards. Several passengers gasped. A man muttered, "Unbelievable," while a young woman shook her head and whispered, "She actually said that out loud." Phones were up everywhere now, red recording lights glowing like judgmental eyes. The security guard hesitated, shifting uneasily, torn between enforcing the woman's demand and following the evidence in his own hand. Marcus's boarding pass, still clearly marked with seat 1A. The truth was undeniable, but power often bent truth in dangerous ways. Marcus, however, remained unshaken. He adjusted the cuff of his beige suit jacket with deliberate calm and slowly reached into the inner pocket. The woman flinched at the motion, but Marcus didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a card. Sleek, black, simple. He held it up between two fingers, his hand steady. The cabin lights caught the embossed silver logo, the airline's insignia. Gasps erupted. Passengers leaned in. Even the flight attendant's eyes widened, her lips parting as if she had just pieced together a puzzle she should have solved long ago. The woman's smirk faltered. Her eyes darted from the card to Marcus's unwavering gaze, then back again. For the first time, her arrogance cracked. Marcus spoke, his voice low but carrying through the entire cabin with authority that required no shouting. "This isn't just my seat. This is my plane, and my airline." The words detonated like thunder. Shock swept the rows. Passengers whispered frantically, "Wait, he owns the airline? No way, did she just... Oh my God, she's finished." The security guard straightened immediately, stepping back, his posture shifting from enforcer to protector. The flight attendant looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. The woman, once so bold, now sat stiffly, her face flushing red. She tried to laugh it off, a brittle, hollow sound. You're joking, right? You expect me to believe, but Marcus cut her off without raising his voice. His calmness was sharper than any shout. Check the name on the card, then check the name on the side of this plane. The attendant, trembling, reached for the card. Her eyes scanned it once, twice, and then widened in disbelief. She turned it toward the woman, the name gleaming clear, irrefutable. Marcus D. Carter, CEO. The same name painted across every aircraft in the fleet. The same name she had probably walked past 100 times without noticing, blinded by her own privilege. The cabin fell silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was electric. The kind of silence where truth finally roars louder than injustice. The woman's composure collapsed. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The diamonds on her wrist glittered under the cabin lights, but they suddenly looked meaningless, cheap, compared to the quiet strength in front of her. She clutched her handbag, fingers trembling. Passengers began to clap, softly at first, then louder until the cabin echoed with applause. Phones captured every second. Social media was already writing her downfall before the plane even lifted off the runway. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply slipped the card back into his jacket, adjusted his cuff again, and took his rightful seat, 1A. The woman sat frozen beside him, stripped not of her seat but of her illusion of superiority. For the first time she realized the truth. Her arrogance had collided with power greater than hers. And this time, she had lost. The security guard remained nearby, no longer to protect her comfort but to ensure Marcus's dignity was respected. The balance of the cabin had shifted entirely. The woman had thought she was making an example of Marcus, but instead, Marcus had become an example to everyone watching. That dignity, patience, and truth, when revealed, carry a force that no entitlement can withstand. The applause didn't stop. It rolled through the cabin like a wave, starting timidly in the back rows, then swelling as more passengers joined in. Phones angled high, recording every clap, every stunned expression, every detail of this once-in-a-lifetime moment. The sound wasn't just appreciation for Marcus. It was the sound of collective justice, the rare moment when arrogance met truth head-on and crumbled. The woman in seat 1A sat frozen. Her diamond bracelet caught the overhead light, but its brilliance had dulled. No amount of luxury could hide the flush on her cheeks or the trembling of her hands as she tried to gather what little dignity she thought she had left. The seat that had once felt like a throne now burned beneath her, as if it no longer belonged to her at all. Marcus adjusted his cuff again and leaned back into his rightful seat, exuding a calm strength. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to say another word. His silence was louder than her shouts had ever been. He simply sat, eyes forward, posture dignified. A man who had faced arrogance with composure and triumphed without losing his soul. The security guard, once called to remove him, now stood respectfully nearby, posture straight, eyes fixed on Marcus. Not as a suspect, but as a man to protect. Even the flight attendant who had hesitated earlier seemed to shrink in guilt, her earlier compliance now heavy on her conscience. Passengers whispered, "Did you hear what he said? He owns the airline." She thought he didn't belong. She's the one who doesn't belong. This is going viral. She's finished. And they were right. Clips were already being uploaded, captions exploding with outrage and admiration. Within minutes, the story would leave the cabin and enter the world. Hashtags would trend, debates would spark, and millions would witness the truth. But inside the plane, a quieter transformation was happening. A man in row 12, who had at first looked away when the woman shouted, now felt a gnawing guilt. He realized his silence had made him complicit. A young woman in row 7, who had filmed everything, now clutched her phone tightly, determined to share the video, not just for views but for justice. An elderly passenger whispered to her seatmate, "I lived through segregation, and still, here we are." The weight of history pressed down on the cabin. This wasn't just a petty argument over a seat. It was a reflection of something deeper, an old wound that had never healed, a prejudice that had never died. The woman beside Marcus finally broke. She turned her head, her voice trembling, words spilling clumsily. I didn't know. I didn't mean..." But Marcus didn't look at her. He didn't need her apology. He knew her words weren't about him, they were about her attempt to salvage her pride. And so, he remained silent. Sometimes silence is the most powerful answer. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but carrying an unusual weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Please remain seated." But even his tone betrayed that he, too, had heard everything. His crew had heard. The entire cabin had heard. And so the plane lifted, not just into the sky but into a moment that would live far beyond the flight itself. As the clouds rolled beneath them, Marcus sat back in 1A, gazing out the window. His reflection in the glass was calm, steady, unshaken. He thought of the millions of others who didn't have the privilege of power, of a name that carried weight, of an airline card that could silence prejudice. He thought of those who were humiliated, dismissed or worse, simply because of the color of their skin. This moment wasn't just about him. It was about them. About every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, who had been treated as less, who had been forced to justify their presence in spaces they had every right to occupy. The applause had faded now. The passengers settled back, but their faces were changed. They had witnessed something that would stick with them. They had seen the mask of superiority ripped away, and they had seen what dignity under fire looked like. Hours later, when the plane touched down, the woman was the first to hurry off, her eyes down, her steps quick, desperate to escape the whispers and the stares. But she couldn't escape the internet. By the time she reached baggage claim, her face was already everywhere. Marcus, on the other hand, walked calmly down the jet bridge, briefcase in hand. Cameras waited outside, passengers trailing behind him, whispering his name. Some even clapped again as he exited, the sound echoing in the terminal. Reporters would chase the story. Articles would dissect it. Debates would erupt online. But Marcus didn't need the spotlight. He had nothing to prove. His quiet dignity had already said more than headlines ever could. Millions watched as a woman demanded a man move because of the color of his skin. And millions watched as that man revealed he owned the very airline she sat on. It was a story too sharp, too poetic to ignore. Some cheered the justice. Others wrestled with discomfort. Many reflected on their own silence in moments of injustice. And slowly, painfully, conversations began. Conversations about privilege, about arrogance, about the casual cruelty still alive in society. Marcus's name trended, but not as a victim, as a reminder. A reminder that dignity can dismantle arrogance, that truth can silence lies, that power, when wielded with calm restraint, can change more than a single seat. It can change perspectives. And yet the question lingered. How many others never get the chance to reveal a card, a title, a name that commands respect? How many others are dismissed, disrespected, and forgotten simply because their power isn't recognized? The world applauded Marcus, but the real challenge wasn't celebrating this one story, it was asking, how many more times must stories like this happen before we finally learn?